Roshan.
Dare to dream, but do to deliver. Alexander was leading his team into battle, not sitting in a camp strategizing when the battle was on.
All right. Malini.
Hashtag mind the gap. Some of the biggest brands in the world were created by fulfilling a need, a craving with their own signature individuality.
Roshan.
I'm missing the tabla because it makes me sound like I'm on NDTV. Yeah, thank you. So, hire your replacement. If you want to scale, hire your replacement or groom your replacement so you can focus on what has not been done.
It's great to scale fast, but it's ultimately about how long you last. Iconic brands are designed for longevity. Hashtag quality, hashtag passion, hashtag love.
Start with spirit, supplement with systems. You know, कहते हैं जब कोई चारा नहीं तो भाईचारा होता है. And you've then got to find the balance between the two, between the system and the spirits if you want to scale.
And for me, number 3, hashtag social media. Social media must be social. Or it's like walking into a party, putting up posters of yourself everywhere, and leaving without talking to anyone. Hashtag engage.
All right. Roshan.
So, I've done with the 3 insights. Now you want us to
Oh, you
tell?
done?
Yeah.
The third one you done?
I did a third, yeah.
All right, okay, I thought.
We did
I think
3,
I
yeah.
did 3.
Oh, maybe I wasn't counting. Okay, great. The next segment. Stories behind the insights. Art first. Your art.
Okay, so my first insight is about minding the gap. So I'm actually going to take you a little bit back, quite a long back in time, to the year 2000. I sound like this because I'm a diplo brat, which is a child of a diplomat, because my father is in the IFS. I landed in Mumbai in the year 2000. I had 2 suitcases, and I lived in a house with 6 girls and 1 pigeon. And every night, this pigeon would fly around, and I thought it's going to hit the ceiling fan and be blood everywhere. And I couldn't Instagram it or Snapchat it, because this is before any of that was in existence, which is kind of crazy for me. And what I realized actually growing up all over the world was that people had a very different perception of India than the variety of things that exist in India. So they would watch National Geographic or, you know, movies like Slumdog Millionaire. And of course those things exist, but they had no concept of the other side of India. So I remember in the 5th grade, I was studying in Greece, and this kid came up to me and said, "You're Indian, do you ride an elephant to school?" I said, "That would be effing awesome, but no." And then, you know, people would always say, "Oh my God, you're Indian, your English is so good." And I'm like, "So is yours." So it was just a strange experience. And then I've lived here now for 20 years in India, and I realized that nobody really talks about the other side. There's so much enterprise, so many entrepreneurs, so many smart people, like all the people in this room, doing crazy things, whether it's Bollywood, fashion, lifestyle, luxury, you name it, we have it. And the one thing I noticed, especially in journalism, the kind I do, which is entertainment, that, you know, there was no real voice. There was no homegrown brand that had a voice. We don't have our own version of Archie comics. We have Chhota Bheem or then Bollywood. So I really wanted to create that individual, that personality that people felt represented the young global Indian. And that's why Miss Malini.
So, in my first insight, when I say dare to dream but do to deliver, you know, I actually balance between art and business because I've set up a bunch of businesses in the creative space. But I've always found that I meet a lot of people who come to you with this really exciting idea but not the ability to deliver. They don't want to put themselves out there. When I was on radio and I started doing television, there was nothing called as professional event management. You just had a bunch of aggregators. I found that gap, but I had to physically be present. I didn't just go and sell that idea to the client. I had to be there every day. There are days when I've been backstage making sure that the last pixel has been focused onto the screen and then shaved backstage at a Gillette show, come on stage and hosted it. Many of the people who worked with me, because we were almost creating a space that didn't exist, said, "We stuck around because you didn't just share a dream, you were around with us to make it deliver." I was there at 4 a.m. I'm a theater guy, I'm used to sleeping on floors before sets are up. And people appreciated that. People liked the fact that you're there. So I think one of the important aspects is when people talk really big in terms of saying scale, and you know, we're going to fill this gap which doesn't exist like what Malini just said, But the space has to be something that you're willing to be physically there. I always tell people about the story about Alexander and Darius, which is that Darius, when Alexander went to face him the first time, had this huge army, and Alexander had just a bunch of soldiers. But what he told each of those soldiers the night before the battle was just one thing. He said, I'm going to give you the mantra to defeat Darius' army. And he whispered something into the ear of one of the people, and they whispered it to everyone else. And suddenly, the next morning, all these people had a singular mission, because the words he had whispered was, kill Darius. Singular mission, singular focus, and he was leading that army from the front. And here was a king who saw 1,000 people facing a lack of his army, but everyone in those 1,000 had his spear pointing at Darius. And that singular focus, that fact that they were being led by Alexander, that they were being taken towards that one thing, they all were out to deliver the same goal. And I think when you really talk about scale, it's important to share that goal, to share the dream, but be around to deliver it.
So well said. Can you give a round of applause?
Thank you.
You know, Roshan's my hero, right? So it's really kind of surreal to be standing on stage with him. Okay, so it's really great to scale fast, but like I was saying, longevity is key, because you can be a brand that scales and then you just disappear, and then what was the point of that? And one of the things that I've also realized in everything I've done, I have a huge amount of OCD, so I'm quite particular about what goes up when. And quality is so important. So you have to be really brutal with yourself. So sometimes late at night you're writing something, like, let me just get it done and put it up. But I always have to have that check. Read it again. Would you read this? Is this interesting? Is it compelling? Is it shareable? Is it entertaining? And if it doesn't hit those benchmarks, you scrap it and you start again. And that's really what quality is about. You also have to be trustworthy. On the internet, people have a really high bullshit radar. They know immediately if you're being fake, just like Rohan said. As soon as you start doing that back in the face until that's part of your personality, or you can, confess to it or have fun with it, people know. And I feel like you need to stand for something, which is also part of, being unique and filling a gap. And you need to stand for something, even if it's something fun. So people always ask me, Malini, how come your blog is so happy, shiny? You love everyone. I'm like, because think about it. Bollywood has always been this 3-hour escape, right? Whether it's someone who rides a rickshaw or someone who works in, finance. It's that 3 hours where you're not thinking about your bills, the fight you had with your wife, the pollution, anything, and you're escaping. And why do people like to see what celebrities wear, what they eat, where they go, all of those things, what they Instagram? It's because it's an extension of that dream. It's that feeling that I'm still in this warm, fuzzy space. So I realized that journalism and entertainment doesn't need to be about ripping people to shreds. Why can't we have, joy for them? Why can't we celebrate them and love them and be happy? So that's kind of a stand that we took. And finally, you have to stand for something else, maybe in a little more serious space, because I think people then understand you for who you are. I don't know if you follow Superwoman, but she just put up an amazing video called Voices. She talks about all the different voices in her head, which is amazing. Some are serious, some worry about, what's happening in world politics, one's goofy. So there is a voice that should have some value that you stand behind. I'll never forget this. I went back to visit some family in Delhi for a while. And one of my aunts says, "Arey beta, you're looking so good. Pehle itni kali si sukri si hoti thi." And I was like, that's a really odd compliment. And there's this obsession with fairness, right? And it happens whether it's in small town India or modern India. You see those ads, those cringeworthy ones. This girl is sad, she has no friends, she won't get married, her parents are like, kya karenge? And then she puts on this fairness cream. Suddenly, she meets the boy of her dreams, she gets a great job, she becomes Miss India. And I realized that aside from the fact that you're ruining people's skin, you're also ruining their, identity and their confidence. So we don't do anything with fairness creams. Now, this is where I come back to quality, is that there's a huge, market. I could make a lot of money working with fairness creams, but I have to choose quality sometimes over profit. And that's where it's really important that you close the loop on that and scale, but scale in a way that people find it memorable.
All right, Roshan.
My second insight about hiring your replacement or grooming your replacement so you can focus on what has not been done. See, when you scale, you start from the middle of a forest and you start with this axe, and the circumference of the problems you keep coming in touch with keeps increasing. Now, you possibly cannot be the only axe there, which is why you need to hand that axe over to someone else so you can address a different part of that market. I've always found that finding your own replacement leaves me free to do a lot more. I've set up about 4 different businesses over a period of time. But in each of them, my first aim is always to find my replacement. And the minute I find that, I am happy because they can focus on one aspect. I can move on to certain other aspects which will be required as you scale. So I think this is one big problem I find in most companies. We try and find people who are lesser than us to hire because we are in this salaried structure issue. And we get into this thing of saying, if this person threatens me in the future, I've somehow never felt that threat. I genuinely feel, and David Ogilvy said this, that if you hire people who are bigger than you, you're a company of giants. But if you hire people who are smaller than you, you're a company of dwarfs. So I think it's really important to find people who have the thing possibly which you don't have, to groom them, to develop them, but find your replacement so you can be redundant in that role and you discover a new role for yourself.
So my final insight is about social media, because clearly I live my life online. I actually do, and people always get annoyed. My only person who understands is my husband who's sitting here, because I'm always on the phone, because I not only live a real life as Malini Agarwal in the real world, you have to understand that the whole digital space is also a living, breathing world. I don't know if you ever heard of a game called Second Life, which people would go and replace their reality with that. So I'm not a real human on the internet unless I spend the same amount of time there, or at least I tell myself that. Okay, let's get the big elephant out of the room. Yes, I'm married, but the site will never be called MrsMalini.com. It's everyone's favorite joke. People always ask me, though, how did I build a brand around a person? And one of the things I always tell brands is that to succeed on the internet, you must have a personality. You must be someone, you must feel like someone. So instead of feeling like a brand and, just someone who's going to sell you something and a banner on a page, you want to feel fun. And I always give this great example of that Hippo Chips, which has a Twitter handle that is just this goofy little hippo that tweets things. You'd be surprised how much recall that has. And I actually buy Hippo Chips because I'm like, oh yeah, that's that funny Twitter handle. And people will then ask you or ask me, then how do you scale, Malini, if your brand is built around a person? And this is the whole point. The reason I built this anime, this girl, I don't know if you've seen her, is because one, she's going to age a lot better than I will. And I feel that Miss Malini now no longer is just about me. I'm trying to create a place of mini-me's, mini Miss Malinis. And Miss Malini now represents and feeds the global millennial Indian. Right now, we feed 4 million unique visitors and 6 million on social media. But think about this. Do you want to know what the size of my market is? There are probably 500 million Indians online today. And 75% of them are under the age of 35. You want to talk about scale? That's potential for scale.
And actually, it's something I'll capture in the 4th insight. But whenever I look at Malini, I've seen her work so hard at what she's done at every level. And I think it's important, and as her team grows, I'm sure she'll have the same issues. I said this earlier, जब हिंदुस्तान में जब कुछ नया शुरू करते हैं, जब कोई चारा नहीं होता तो भाईचारे पे कंपनियां चलती हैं. दोस्ती यारी पे चलती हैं, spirit पे चलती हैं. And as an artist, I've seen very often, it's just the spirit, there are people who sometimes will sit with me over a drink and turn and say, यार तू इतने सपने दिखा देता था उस टाइम पे हम लोगों को, and वो सपने इतने exciting होते थे कि हम लोग साथ में चल पड़ते थे. Initially, उस भाईचारे से हमने company चलाई. And when we ran the company, because again, we didn't even know how to pay a servicing guy. We didn't know what to pay for a creative idea. We didn't know whether the MC should be paid more or the person who was on stage or the person who made the film. There were none of these norms. So we kept doing this purely as a discovery, as we went along discovering. So I say this is the spirit phase of a company. So when you start up, a lot of it is just sheer spirit. All the startups, so many young innovators, and whenever I meet them, what I'm looking for is the spirit. Do they have that spirit to succeed? But as you go along and as you start scaling, suddenly spirit needs to be supplemented by systems. And that's where I find a lot of startup failure, and I've often seen a lot of creative people also having this failure, which is that you need to find systems. When we did it, actually, we got this lady who'd worked at Saatchi to come on board and said, no, we'll have a really professional company. And she came out and said, this is going to be the timing. People will come at 9 in the morning. They'll leave at this time. They'll do this. This is the reports they'll submit. And, we had about 30% of our people leaving. I was like, what happened? And said, there are too many systems. And we suddenly realized that there has to be, you can't go from one end of the spectrum to the other end. You need to find that happy balance in between spirit and system. Because I had a guy coming and saying, earlier you didn't care whether I came at 11 or I left at 9 in the night. Now suddenly you really want me to come in at 9 in the morning. Why is it so? And people will have these questions, and millennials have a million questions because they're constantly asking you about a lot more about things of saying, what does it mean to me? How does it make a difference to me? But while that is there, I think within that framework to find the right systems and then find that balance is critical for scale.
All right, thank you so much. And let's have the last segment, which is Fresh Insight. Go, Malini.
So I love that your insight started with Alexander because I'm like, that's amazing. I think the one thing that I'm learning listening to you, and you've always maintained that, well, this mic is trying to kill me, that the brands that I think that scale are actually, it's unique. The brands that scale are the ones that have the balls and the ego to want to leave a legacy behind them. So it's not about just me, me, me. It's like, look at what I'm going to do. I'm going to build the next me. And I think that's amazing.
No, and I think the whole thing of, I said this about Malini, and this is something really important that I believe, and I've said this to people. I love that what she does with a happiness quotient that radiates from her and her team. Not just her entire team. They've got this almost, this halo around them of happiness. At Encompass, which is Geometry Global Encompass today, 2 years back, we had an offsite, and there we said, we're going to have a new CFO. I know my whole office was, oh my God, one more finance person, what are they going to do, and ab kya naya rule laenge? And we unveiled that to be the chief fun officer. So our company has a chief fun officer whose job is every 15 days to do an activity that keeps our people happy. Again, the younger your people will get at work, the more these things make a difference. Am I learning? Am I doing something meaningful? Am I happy? Because the kind of demand that our jobs have, I mean, Malini, again, and I said this to a bunch of friends, saying you can't, behind all that really snappy line, that great video, that great Instagram piece that she puts out is a lot of hard work. But they have a lot of fun while they're doing that. And I think that's what I always take away from her. I take this little halo of happiness. And she said that, I'm amongst the happiest people she knows, but it's almost this rub-off effect. So I'm going to take that back, saying you want to build a great brand, you want to scale, to supplement that spirit, bring in that halo of happiness, do stuff that is meaningful, do stuff that wants to leave a legacy behind.
I can now drop the mic and go, my hero has said this, so I'm done.
All right, thank you so much. So it was a great Insight Storm, and I would like to invite on stage two amazing friends who are also great authors. That's Radhakrishnan Pillai, who's written Chanakya in You, and also Corporate Chanakya, the book that's done really, really well. Thank you for being here, Radha. He writes for our Insight Bazaar, and the author of Storm the Norm, Anisha Motwani. Come over. All right.